Hello my dear gardeners! Winter protection on roses. In this series of videos I'm going to include every information possible on winterizing roses for us to be able to bring that rose through the winter successfully. Olga Carmody with you here today, master gardener from Connecticut. Let's begin. What is winter protection? Some gardeners might think that winter protection is keeping our roses cozy warm during the cold winter days. Wrong. As one of famous rosarians in our area, Mike Foss, says, proper winter protection is, again, properly bringing rose into the dormant season and keeping that rose through the winter in the dormant season for rose only to wake up in the middle of spring or at the beginning of spring next year. So let's unpack this statement. The rose going into dormancy doesn't take one day. It's a slow process, and in our area it begins somewhere at the end of July. And I garden in zone 6-7 coastal Connecticut, so we do have well-pronounced seasons, and our winter begins somewhere at the beginning of December. Those strong first frosts, somewhere around Thanksgiving we start to experience those. And very often gardeners make three major mistakes in preparing rose into dormant season, which would be, the first mistake would be using fertilizers in the fall season. So for us it's after July. And by the way, if you want to know different schedules, how to fertilize and when to fertilize your roses in different parts of United States, here's a video. It's a very good video with different schedule for different regions. So what happens to the rose after July? The days are getting shorter, slightly shorter, temperatures starting to drop, especially in September, and rose starts to conserve energy instead of pushing new growth. Rose starts to focus on conserving energy and resources, bringing all the carbohydrates into the root system, into the stem, storing all the food for winter. And if gardeners suddenly decide to fertilize roses in the middle of September with a high nitrogen fertilizer, it's going to be a disaster. Why? Because nitrogen is responsible for that nice, beautiful green growth and long, thick stems, which are the beauty of spring. But in the fall, actually, roses don't want to do that. Roses are getting towards the road of conserving energy, slowing down on metabolism, slowing down on the movement of sugars up and down the stems. So cell activity is becoming less in the structure of stems. Stems are becoming more woody to be able to withstand freezes of the winter so much better. And if gardener decides to put that fertilizer in, rose cannot decide to take or not to take a fertilizer. Rose doesn't have that ability. Rose takes water with a dissolved fertilizer in the water into its roots, moves that water up the stem because rose evaporates water through the leaves. That's how the plant lives, right? So with the help of the movement of that water, bringing up nutrients. And if we have a lot of new fertilizers dissolved in that water available to the roots of the rose, rose takes it in, uses it, and starts changing its growth pattern in the middle of the fall. It starts building up new foliage and new stems and new buds and new flowers, which is not the way to do it. So that's one big mistake. Second mistake would be to keep watering as we do at the beginning of the year. So during the fall, rose slows down on nutrients intake and water intake. And roots are not as good with dealing with water conditions as they would do it in spring. So the suggestion would be we slow down on fertilization and watering schedule and let rose take whatever nature gives it. In our region we do have good rainfall, so after July I leave my roses to be. I don't fertilize them, I don't water them, and I stop deadheading them. That's another mistake which gardeners would do. So let's look into this. So the plant, if it will have two choices, to live or to create a seed and become in the process weaker or even to face death, the plant will choose to create the seed, even if it will cost it weakened growth or weaker performance next year, still that desire to produce the seed for next generation is genetically ingrained into the plant DNA. That is why very often when we pass the nursery spaces and we see these beautiful trees blooming galore in pots, and we are thinking, oh my gosh, how beautiful and healthy they look. That's the case on the contrary. Those plants are so stressed out in those pots, and they know that they're going nowhere, they're not developing, and they are busy creating, investing all their last energy into creating that bloom, which might create a fruit, which might create a seed for next generation. And if we deadhead rose, we deprive it of creating a future seed, right? Because rose will create a flower, and flower automatically goes into seed if we don't have a hybrid plant in front of us, which is incapable of creating seeds. So rose, if we deadhead our rose, it gets a point that, oh my, I have to create another bloom because I need to create a seed for next generation, for next year and years to come. So what rose does, it starts again pushing new growth. The processes in its tissues are changing again, reversing. Instead of slowing down and slowing down on taking sun rays because leaves are falling down, putting all the energy into its roots and stems, all the nutrients, rose again needs to create new blooms and new stems. And how is new bloom created? First, rose needs to create a stem out of a bigger stem, and then develop a rose bud, and then create a rose, and then only create the hip. So what I would advise you to do, if you really don't want all those petals falling down from the rose, just take those petals off and leave the future hip to be created. Since rose is happy to create hips, and some roses create hips better than others, once rose create hips, it did its job for the year, right? It created seeds, and now the processes of going into dormancy is on its way. So now I think these three examples and mistakes show you a bigger picture, how you can help in preparing roses going into dormancy. Since roses are so highly developed plants in the garden, and they are bred to give us bloom after bloom after bloom cycle, that we can force rose into blooming all the way till freezing conditions, but that is not going to be good for the rose. The best thing what the gardener can do is to have the healthiest rose before winter, and then the healthy rose can withstand the harsh conditions of winter so much better. So, great watering, wonderful fertilization, not to overdo it, not to underdo it, great location in the garden, proper management of pests and diseases. And then we have the great beginning to face those winter months. And talking about winter these days, unpredictable conditions. And in our area last winter we had this very unusual warm time, week in the middle of February or at the beginning of February, and a lot of plants broke that dormancy. And what happens when plant breaks dormancy? All the activities in the cell tissues start to be activated. The juices start flowing up and down the stems. The cells of the stems are becoming less able to withstand cold. And then February is continuing, the winter continues, the cold weather snaps back again, and that plant already lost the protection against the cold. And the damage of tissues happens, and as a result, our rose overwinters with a lot of dead stems, those brown, ugly stems, which every rosarian hate with the appearance of spring. So, the importance of keeping rose dormant through the winter is super important. And because of all these climate fluctuations we have, we don't know what winter we are going to have next, the thawing and freezing cycle, winter protection does just that. It protects rose from those fluctuations of temperature and keep rose in that dormant stage. One more thing I wanted to tell. When we look closely into the tissues of the rose, when rose is dormant, what happens in the tissues? The processes in the tissues of the plant which are dormant are not well understood. But what scientists know now is that the levels of hormones are fluctuating drastically in dormant plant and in actively growing plant. So growth suppressing hormones are increased, the levels, and growth inducing hormones are very much on the lowest level. And rose stays in this stage where it almost doesn't grow, almost doesn't create any new tissues. You can see a lot of new buds being created. And rose stays in this little stage of not moving, doing nothing, waiting for those days to become a little bit longer, the light to become a little bit bigger, the warmth coming in of spring, and then the process of waking up out of dormancy begins. And we want that to happen only in spring. What is the best time for putting roses into a dormant stage? Well, in colder climates where we experience nice cold winters, we do have that time when we have short freezes where temperature falls below freezing conditions, and the freezing time can last for an hour or two, which is not going to hurt the roses. It just signalizes to the rose that that's it. It's a dormant time, you better go in and prepare for winter. And then we have an open window where you can do a lot of things to the rose, including potted roses. And then we start to have these long freezes through the night of 7-8 hours of freezing temperatures. That would be the time when all the roses in pots, which are not ready to be outside, should be already in the garage or in unheated protected area. But we will talk about potted roses, when to bring them in. So the window between short freezes and long freezes is the time for gardener to actively work in the garden and do active protection on roses. And what is that active protection of roses? I will start from the easiest one going to the most difficult one. So the easiest protection would be on our miniature roses, of course, right? They are small, they're easy to cover, and the easiest would be to pile hail of leaves, put the chicken wire around the plant or some sort of thing to keep it in place, those leaves, sticks, shrubbery, and let leaves do the insulation. And I will warn you not to do any type of leaves. Oak leaves are the best because they don't collapse on each other, those leaves, and they don't invite diseases. Maple trees, I have plenty of those happy trees around here. They have a tendency at the end of winter to stick together and create a wet mass, sticky mass, and that invites a lot of diseases around roses. That can actually kill your plant. So protection with leaves would be the first one. The second one would be hailing of soil around your rose root area. And look at this rose. So we have generous gardener here, right? This rose is hardy to zone 5. I don't protect it because I live in zone 6, 7, and I really don't want to work hard protecting my roses and sitting through all winter guessing. Is my Lady of Shalott going to survive winter or not? Or do I need to replant it again? I don't want to do that game. So I deliberately plant roses, at least one zone hardier than where I am. So that would be my big advice if you don't want to do all the winter protection. So my generous gardener is zone 5. Lady of Shalott, zone 5. Next one would be Queen of Sweden, also zone 5. I have around 22 roses in my garden and none of them are zone 6. But if you have something zone 6 and you need to protect it, what you do, you take a soil from somewhere around your garden, not near around roots of your rose, and you hail it. You just put a hill, nothing scientific about it. You just put a hill of soil around here, around the stems, probably on this distance high, 10 inches high. You make sure that soil is not going to be moved away by wind or water. And that would be the second good insulation. So when the temperatures are fluctuating in the middle of the winter, that rose is not going to get too warm quickly or too cold quickly, and it will stay dormant. That's what we want. We don't want that rose to break dormancy. Next step would be to use, near that hill, to use a chicken wire and stuff it with leaves on top of the soil mound. And you don't need to use the soil. You can do your favorite mulch. Of course, we don't use stones as mulch. You can use compost. And compost is actually probably, to my opinion, is the best thing to use because when spring comes, you can just spread it around your rose, and that can be great extra food for the rose in spring to have a nice fresh start there. And of course, Big shrubs are more difficult to protect, and if we talk about climbers, that probably would be the most difficult job to do, and that's why I never have very cold sensitive climbers. And sometimes, you know, I drool over the internet looking at those beautiful pictures of those southern beauties, roses which are sensitive in zones 7, 6, and sometimes I'm thinking to myself, should I buy it, should I persuade myself, and I will do all sorts of winter protections of it, it's going to be so beautiful. And then I talk myself out of it very quickly, because look at this plant, it's a huge plant. So what do gardeners do if they want to protect such a climber? They do tie all the stems together. It doesn't have to be scientific again. If you need to trim long side shoots, you do that. You don't trim main stems, right? Because that's a framework of your rose. So you tie it loosely with the string, and then you take porous fabric. Nothing plastic. Plastic will bake those stems under the winter sun. So you take burlap fabric or some porous fabric which is loosely woven, and you just wrap it around your rose all the way through. And what job is that? Roses are so thorny, majority of them, so it's a lot of work. But I understand gardeners love a certain rose, and maybe they have memories attached to that rose and they want to save that rose. One additional advice for those who have roses on exposed sites. Because what happens on exposed sites? We have desiccated winds. And a lot of times people don't explain why wind can hurt the rose. What happens when the wind blows on the stem? Stem has certain amount of liquids inside of it, so the cold wind takes that liquid with it, and stem doesn't have enough of resources to fill that liquid back into the stem, because everything around the root zone is frozen, so there's no access to water, and the persistent cold wind is blowing through that stem, taking all the water away. And what happens? The rose stem dries up, and in spring again we have that black stem which all rosarians hate, right? So what do we do about it? There's this product which Bornite company produces, and it's a anti-desiccant spray. I forgot the name of it, but I will put it on the screen. And basically some gardeners are kind of afraid of it, and nothing to be afraid of. It's a good product, it's a natural product. It's basically like a waxy coat you put around the stem, and it protects it from all the wind and doesn't allow all the water to evaporate. One thing to keep in mind, that waxy coat can be taken down by warm water. So when you have warm spell in winter and it rains, all your protection would be gone, so you need to reapply it again. But that's an extra step if you want to super protect your rose. Some gardeners, what they do, they also do the final spraying on all the roses before they wrap them into that burlap, or they put some sort of protection around the root zone, because inevitably some diseases can move in. And also keep in mind why that timing is so crucial when we do all this protection, not before rose into dormancy and not after it experienced severe frosts. Why not before? Well, if you have this nice cozy thing around the rose and it's not in full dormant stage, rose might think, suddenly it became warm. I'm still working here on having nice activity. Maybe I should start growing again. So we wait till the dormant time is fully there, which happens after first good frosts, short good frosts in our area. And if we delay our winterization, then rose can be damaged by those long winter spells where the cold weather, the freezing weather lasts for 6, 7, 8 hours through the night. Another great way of protecting roses, although it has a lot of disadvantages to my opinion, would be rose cones. And they became recently very popular and very expensive. So what are rose cones? Those are bucket-looking covers which are made out of styrofoam, and the majority of them are white, and they're around $30, expensive one. And the disadvantages of them are that they are smallish, so you can't really protect a big shrub with it. You really have to trim your rose really down, tie it up to move it into this cone. And there was a question from the viewer who asked me if the rose, which is only hardy to zone 6-7, can it be successfully overwintered in zone 5 with the help of a cone? And my answer is yes, it can. Cones can move the hardiness of a plant by 1 or 2 USDS hardiness zone. So rose hardy till zone 6-7 can be overwintered successfully in zone 5 with the help of cone. The way to install that cone would be to secure it, to tie the rose, cut it. Try not to jam all the stems into that cone. Try to trim them, tie them, put the cone on top of it. Make sure that cone is not being blown by the wind. So usually people put bricks on top of it or secure some chicken wire around it. The cone creates a special microclimate inside it, underneath. So ventilation is very important because mildew can move in. So you have to make several holes in the cone. You have to constantly monitor the rose inside, again for rodents who wants to make a house there, and for possible diseases. A lot of rosarians do spray roses with their favorite, whatever they do. I do organic gardening, so I would spray my rose with neem oil if I would put a cone around it. And make sure that you take that cone quickly in spring out, or open it up, cut the top off. I know it's not a big investment just for one season, but you really have to watch for condensation in spring to build up, and monitor your rose. So that's about cones. Again, they're very expensive and you cannot protect big roses with it. And you really need to trim roses. And for something like hybrid teas, severe trimming is good, but something like for shrub roses, severe trimming is not advised. So big roses are not good to be saved under the cones. Better to do winter protection with some sort of a cover. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this video would be, since we have such unpredictable weather, right, these days, what if somebody lives in zone 7B or 8, where winters are fairly mild, and suddenly they're expecting big freeze coming for 2 days? What to do? Honestly, just take a big blanket, which you don't really use a lot in the house, some old stuff, and just cover your rose. Tuck it in with the help of bricks or stones or whatever, and keep it for a day or two when that strong frost is there. This way you will protect that rose. So blankets, whatever you have, sheets of fabric, just cover it and let it live through that freeze. All right, my dear gardeners, in our next video, we are going to talk about to defoliate our roses before winter or not to defoliate. And we are going to talk about these two big groups of roses into which all roses can be divided. In roses which definitely benefit from the dormant season, and they depended for their longevity and well performance, and roses which can live in this semi-evergreen or evergreen stage through the dormant season and be perfectly fine. All right, my dear gardeners, please subscribe not to lose track of this wonderful series, I think, and I will see you in my next video. Happy gardening!